kick off. Excellent. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this innovation workshop on day 3 of Genesis 2021. My name is Alicia Gallier. I'm Business Development Manager at One Nucleus, and I'm delighted to be welcoming you to this morning's session. So this innovation workshop is hosted by Flanders Investment and Trade, and the topic of the panel discussion is going to be around clinical data, standards and access, and how this can be used to improve patient outcomes. So a very important topic indeed, and one that certainly resonates with the network like One Nucleus, where all of the activities we do and engage with are really geared towards better patient outcomes. So I'm shortly going to hand to Jan Wouters, who's going to be our moderator for the session. Just a few words on logistics ahead of that. So we are recording the session, as you'd heard. So this means it will be available as part of the on-demand content for the conference. In addition, like always, we do want to have an interactive session. After all, we have called it a workshop. So the chat function is enabled. So please feel free to drop comments and questions into that. And just discussing with Jan ahead of the session, we're going to run it as a panel for sort of the first 45 to 50, and then we'll reserve time at the end for your comments and questions. So we've got an hour in total. And if you're not part of the panel, if you can kindly remain muted, that would be much appreciated. So that is enough from me. So Jan, I'm going to hand the floor to you and obviously give the panelists a chance to introduce themselves as well. So thank you all for your time, and I hope everyone enjoys the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining this webinar at the Genesis conference, which is a special times. These are still not normal times, and so I think we have a fantastic tool now to make an hour that is very interesting and very hot topic, more than ever, I would say. My name is Jan Wouters. I work for Flanders Investment and Trade. This is the government agency of Flanders for economic development. And this is a collaboration with our office in London, or actually an organization of the office in London. But enough words about me. It's not about me, it's about the speakers and about the topic today. We have a great lineup of speakers. We have, and I'm just going through my window here, Jerome van Biervliet, Dr. Jerome van Biervliet. He's the Managing Director for the Flemish Institute of Biotechnology, headquartered in Ghent, Belgium. Then we have Dr. John Gallagher, Professor of Cognitive Health at Oxford University and Director of the Dementias Platform in the UK. And last but not least, we have Dr. Bruno Holthoff, who is the CEO of the Oxford University Hospitals. The webinar is titled Improving Patient Outcome with Better Clinical Data Interoperability, which essentially means that we're going to look at patient data records, and what is the future about that. And I think we're very well positioned to do this webinar at this conference in this city, because if I recall, the UK is actually, I would say, a leader or at the forefront of bringing patient data together. And I think the NHS has the largest database maybe in the world, if I'm correct. And please correct me later on in this webinar to do so. But before we go into the topics, I would briefly like to have the panelists introduce themselves for about a minute or so maximum. So I'll start in the same line of order with Jerome.
Thank you, Jan. And it's a pleasure to be here and to represent VIB. Very briefly, myself, well, I'm the managing director of VIB. We are an entrepreneurial research institute based indeed in Belgium, in Flanders. What we do is we focus on basic science, but especially with an aim to translate this into patient benefit through economic development as well. So we are, myself, I have 15 years in biotech background. I'm a clinically trained scientist by background before that. And right now I'm a board member of 4 of our startup companies in the portfolio. So that's me, and happy to pass on to John.
Well, also, thank you very much, Jan, for the invitation. As Director of Dementias Platform UK, my focus is on the interface between research data and routinely collected data. I think that there is plenty of opportunity here, but actually plenty of challenges as well. And I'm looking forward to this discussion.
Thank you, Bruno.
Yes, Bruno Holthoff, as you said, Chief Executive of Oxford University Hospitals. We cover a region of about 4 million called Thames Valley in the UK, 4 million residents, and we provide local services, but also tertiary services to that area. We have about 1 million patient contacts a year and therefore collect quite a lot of data routinely. But we're also hosting the Biomedical Research Center, which collects a lot of research data as well on patients. So I'm sure that we can talk about clinical data and research data and how we can create value from that.
Okay, thank you very much. That was actually very, very efficient. Everyone stayed right in time. Let's set the stage and talk about, go from a general level. We see that there's a lot that happened in the past few years on new technologies, new architectures, new infrastructures, and we can have actually set the stage for new frontiers to organize data systems of patient data much better. And the first question maybe to you, Jerome, is have we entered a new era? Are we now ready to maybe patch up different data systems into one global system or one national system or one at least regional system?
Yes, well, at least I think it's really becoming mainstream. I think there's still, like was said before, some challenges ahead. But I think what's really changing now is in the past, a lot has been also looked at in terms of how can we improve patient care through really researching that data that's available. I think what is changing now, in my view at least, is the parallel revolution in the accuracy of research methodologies, which we can apply to patient tissues, for example, and how this directly can translate into insights for patient care, or for that matter, further development of novel things, and so which translates into economy. And so I think that's a potential for disruptive, bigger steps in patient innovation, and that's, I think, what's going to drive some of the challenges, namely, okay, getting to a system on a national level, which indeed the UK is pioneering there, but in a supranational level, on an international basis as well, is going to be driven by those opportunities much more than the incremental type improvements that we were thinking about in the past. So from my perspective, I think it's bright future ahead, but perhaps the colleagues can also comment here.
Yeah, maybe John, if you have a comment on that.
I think it's worth taking a step back and thinking what are the big issues here. I think in terms of the science, we're talking about increasing precision. At the basic level, I would say that is understanding molecular and cellular complexity, and from that, it's you have a handle on developing new treatments. I think there are many ways of doing that. It's not just necessarily a lab-based exercise. I think you have large research cohorts and large databases, which would also inform that goal. I think the other side of the equation is control. The more detailed your data and the more complex your data, the greater its power, and that is the greater its power for misuse as well. And protecting patient confidentiality, patient identity becomes a greater challenge. My view is that there is great value in integrating data across the different modalities and sectors, but that it should be integrated on a per purpose basis, rather than integrated just for the sake of integrating. And if you can make it easy to integrate, the cost of doing it again for a slightly different purpose is not great, and you also therefore defer or abrogate the risk of it being misused at a later date. So I do think there are fantastic opportunities, but there are very real governance and security issues, which mean that it's not just a matter of one big, one ring to rule them all database.
Yeah. Just staying for a second on this high-level strategic view, Bruno, from your side, because you're with your both feet in the clinic and working with patients. How do you perceive that? Is it ready to go to a next stage now to accelerate thoroughly?
Yeah, I think during the COVID pandemic, the UK has done a number of clinical trials under the name of Recovery. Yeah. And I think this is a great example of what John was saying with a real purpose. Yeah, and it's to find effective treatments against a deadly disease. And lots of NHS trusts were integrating their data into this trial, and the research was actually embedded in the clinical practice. So it was not a research trial run next to the clinical practice. The data was collected as part of the routine clinical care. So for me, this is a great example of a real useful use case. Yeah? I mean, a real purpose to integrate the data using clinical data that was routinely collected anyway, to have significant breakthroughs in terms of identifying that dexamethasone was effective, and then which monoclonal antibodies gave protection and what degree of protection, and which antivirals. So a very fast way to identify effective treatments, integrating clinical data across a large part of the National Health Service, which is, I think, a good example of what can be done at the national level. It would be great, Jan, to your opening question, that we could do these more internationally. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure, yeah, we'll get there. But I don't know sort of the same sort of examples where international data, clinical data, was integrated with a specific purpose.
Well, that's a good point. Yeah. So we're still far away from international level. I think, Jerome, you want to say something?
Well, perhaps to I think the better way of phrasing it would be, I think that indeed the COVID case clearly exemplifies the breakthrough that we're talking about on a very big scale because of the urgency and the crisis. But I think on a smaller level, on pilot scales, we can really demonstrate the initial benefit we can gain with specific research questions that we want to tackle in specific disease areas, driven by clinical hypotheses, and indeed absolutely compliant with the concerns that John was highlighting, the patient privacy, etc. But really drive that and then apply the biomolecular accuracy, which is today indeed much higher than before, using all the basically the research setting and the expertise that's there on those questions, come up with pilot data that really highlight it, and then move it to a national or international level. I think that's probably the way it's going to move, rather than immediately, I think we should build the international level as well. But I think, okay, this stage approach makes sense. It also is a good test of the hypothesis that drive these specific research questions. It also highlights, however, that we're talking about research, meaning you need to have an environment, and I would say an infrastructure also, to do this type of projects in a patient privacy preserving way. And so I think that in of itself holds a lot of challenges, which are being addressed as we speak. But I think that's what we should focus on first, and likely I think through these pilot projects we can really highlight the potential and then gradually scale up. And I think that's also where the international community, certainly in Europe, is thinking along those lines.
Yeah. So because when I was thinking, like, there's a lot of breakthrough technologies that are happening right now, mostly in the research domain. Think about single cell genomics, or maybe even spatial biology applications. Are these technologies ready to be used, so to speak, on patient data?
Well, we should be correct. I think those they are ready to be used in a research setting, in an exploratory setting, to really understand better the biology of disease, as John was saying earlier, to lay out a much more fine-grained understanding of what really happens in the patient. And so, for example, we have run the last 5 years a number of what we call grand challenge programs, basically applying this type of technology to specific research questions, to specific patient samples, and of course associated data, to derive from that novel hypotheses, because you can really see what happens in which cell at which moment relative to therapy. And so it's a great hypothesis generation, let's say, setting, which can now be translated to further development, novel treatments, novel biomarkers, and also possibly new startup creations. Because based on this type of data, we've already noticed, and we've already been able at VIB to start 2 new startup companies based on the insights derived from that. Again, not based on the data, but based on the insights towards novel therapeutics or novel biomarkers. So I think it's a great time that these things become possible, and I think it will accelerate patient care in the end.
Yeah.
If I could just
sure
come in there, one of the challenges we have in the UK, and I suspect it's true elsewhere, is the translational gap going into human studies. So we have very good technologies for developing biomarkers, or putative biomarkers, good discovery bench science, good animal models, good iPSC models. But when you come into putting it into actual living human beings to see how it works, that's actually very difficult. But the need for this, what we might describe as experimental medicine, is absolutely imperative, because by doing that, you then de-risk the next stages of the translational pipeline. And so there's a lot of thought going on in the UK about how to develop this experimental medicine, particularly in my field, dementia. There have been so many failed large-scale trials. In order to stop industry bailing out, we need some way of helping them de-risk their investments. And this is the simplest way to do this is to make it relatively straightforward to do these human experimental studies.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned dementia, and I think it also connects to the application drivers of the success of having national or global health data systems. What are the most? I mean, also I have mentioned the pandemics that has taken care of some kind of a surge or maybe an acceleration of some developments. What would you say are the biggest drivers in this? Are certain therapeutic domains? Is it everything, or is it the remote monitoring thing that is gonna drive this kind of systems that we develop? Is there like a one single big application driver that's maybe will take care of the biggest drive behind it?
If there is, I don't know what it is. My view is that you've got a whole load of sort of innovative and incremental ideas contributing, and what we would like to have is an infrastructure, a system, governance, technology, regulation, which approprially allows the benefits of these ideas to be realized. But it's above my pay grade to say what they are.
I want to come in here. I think in the UK, the 100,000 genome project and the biobank were sort of the initial drivers of a lot of what we've just been discussing. I think the fact that we're going to use again gene sequencing, whole genome sequencing, more in the routine care for at least cancer and rare diseases. So in my view, cancer will be the main driver for some further integration, because we do need access to the whole genome sequencing data. We will need access to imaging data, to data that's captured in the laboratory information systems. And we may use some data as well that's captured in the electronic patient records to integrate this data to help with either early detection in cancer, or at least certainly early diagnosis and treatment will be main drivers, I think, for more integration of data sources.
Yeah, maybe I can couple to that because that's also a trend ongoing. For example, in the Belgian Cancer Registry, the sequencing information is indeed already also being captured. And so we're trying to link the Cancer Registry to the research environment where, you know, coming back to the experimental medicine part of John, where you could start pressure testing certain assumptions you've made for example, you know, how the translational gap that you were talking about. Can you find proxies in that type of data set, for example, that would de-risk or at least highlight certain aspects of it for a novel biomarker or a novel treatment. A very concrete example I can give is, for example, in the area of SPA, where we're running this type of experimental trial on the one hand, but complemented with single cell omics and the associated data, and then really looking at, okay, how would an early mechanistic intervention really affect a patient outcome on the one hand, what molecular mechanisms are changing, and in fact, what would be the pharmacoeconomic case to that? Because that's the flip side also from a government point of view. Integration of data is also a very useful let's say starting point for research in terms of, okay, what's the most efficient patient care, or what are the most efficient treatment journeys we should reimburse for example, at least in our country. So I think those three things can come together there, but again, there are pilot projects ongoing, at least in our sense, based on specific questions. How to really, you know, scale this is still some ways away.
Yeah, to the general public, there is, I mean, if you're thinking out of let's say the perspective of the patient, you have two things. You go to a hospital and there is some patient data and everything, and sometimes you're surprised you need to take an X-ray twice or three times with a different doctor, a different hospital, these things. But on the other hand, you have, and as Bruno already mentioned, you have the pandemic. And there is this pandemic side where you see I work in Paris, and every weekend there's people on the streets to oppose for the regulation. I mean, the restrictions that there are, including the health pass. This is not, of course, something you're going after for patient data records, but it is something that also influences the citizen and the patient ultimately. Do you think that the pandemic will give a huge boost, because also the government is hugely involved in this whole pandemic? I mean, as you mentioned already in the beginning, the government has a role to play here, and we will come back to that, also to the business model of that. But is the government gonna be like have a one-time opportunity now to put its foot down on certain things and make it happen with and accelerate the whole integration of patient data record systems? Or this is going to go away, the pandemic, maybe within a year we all lose the health pass and whatever that is, and we don't bother about it anymore?
I think in the UK, COVID brought a focus of attention on how to get things done. And the recovery trial is an absolutely brilliant example. I mean, I can have absolutely nothing to do with it. I can claim no credit for it in any way. All I can do is admire it. And I think that the linking of electronic health records with research data also took a very large step forward, because with cohorts, for example, you have many years lead-in data that you can relate to the COVID outcome. So again, you get an idea of the impact of comorbidity, and in the larger cohorts like UK Biobank, the impact of genetics and various omics. So will that momentum carry on? Well, I think it will. I think the patient will see, patients and public will see so many benefits from this that there will be a strong case. And the scientists see, this is what they've been asking for years. So why would they not keep the pressure up? But they do need to keep the pressure up. I don't think it's a foregone conclusion. because of things like spending reviews, economic climates, etc., etc. But it's a fantastic step forward.
I agree with John. I think there's two drivers that will keep the momentum. One is the NHS reform towards integrated care systems, where there's going to be a real incentive to link up the IT systems of different providers, even after the pandemic. And second is a significant increase in funding for R&D, which again will increase sort of the interest in getting access to the data as well. And most of this data still sits in disparate systems. I mean, we talked about PACS systems, LIMS systems, EPRs, research databases, tissue banks. So it is quite disparate, but there's going to be a lot of money going into the integration of the data sets. And as John was saying, the curation of the data sets to make them more useful for research purposes. As well as operational uses as well. So I think both the move towards integrated care systems and the increased investment in research and development will drive the momentum that was created as a consequence of the pandemic.
Because patients today, there's a majority of the population that agrees with the use of their data. That's kind of an agreeing with the governance, but there is also, of course, a minority that doesn't. Is that going to change, you think? This because the governance of the whole thing is going to be important, and in some way maybe might raise questions once the pandemic is gone. How is that going to be handled? Is that something that's handled on the national level, or is it public opinion?
So I mean, we're creating trusted research environments in the UK, and as part of that, the governance of the data is really important. And we will develop a technical solution to implement this trusted research environment to allow patients to decide what use can be applied to their data, so they can opt in or out depending on specific purposes of using the data. So the individual patients will get a key in these integrated data sets, which I think will hopefully also create trust with patients that their data will be only used for purposes that they agree with.
The issue is trust is absolutely central. And, you know, as Bruno said, using trusted research environments, interoperable with each other, and hopefully not too many of them, and coordinated. Let's just hope that works out. I think is a good solution. But I think the other half of it is the public seeing the benefits, that there is a fair exchange of benefits. So, for example, for companies to be seen to be making a profit, it's essential, but actually for companies to be seen to be contributing to the public good in the, you know, as a part of their business plan, I think will be increasingly important.
Absolutely. And there I would make the parallel to, I mean, even 20 years ago when there was this debate on publicly funded basic research and how that can translate into how or should to economic activity. I think it's a similar debate here, provided trust is the first and foremost value we should preserve. But I think there is opportunity because if ALS patients give their samples, they want to see a therapeutic being developed. They want to see something moving ahead. So I think, and that's really that's where I would say you really need this trusted profit third party to be the in-between between let's say, you know, public investments in this case in patient care, and on the other side the economy creation. I think this is really important to be mindful of that. But there's the good news is both in the UK as well as in Belgium and in many other countries, there's a large tradition on how to do this. There's a whole body of professionals that know how to navigate this field and catch both. So I think that's really the switch that we ought to because okay, I agree that we should be very cautious. On the other hand, like I said, if patients do expect us as research parties or in this ecosystem to look for solutions for their disease. That's what they're expecting. Certainly, so I think that's also the flip side, and I agree. You should really highlight the benefits of what we make possible, and I think this type of the research and how it's moving now, it's also much more actually involving the patients or patient organizations from the start, so that patient representatives can really inform the research process, but also be really a kind of a privileged witness on okay, what this can mean for them in the longer run. And actually many of them deal with the fact that okay, research takes a long time very well. So
yeah, when we talk about the scope, Ali, the geographical scope, I mean, we're talking on the one hand about if you look at the UK, you have the UK government on the one hand, you have the NHS, and then of course you have the universities and the hospitals. But that's not the same everywhere in the world. I mean, there are different structures, different systems in different parts. So if we want to I like in Belgium, for instance, it's going to be a little bit different. But if we want to expand this system from a national system to an international system, aren't we going to have to fight against completely different trust factors because of the way that the governments have, or not the governments, or the nations have actually set up their health system? I think, for instance, about the US is a completely different health system. It's a completely privatized. Canada is a nationalized health system. How can we foresee I mean, we can talk about Europe first, but if we look at the global scale, can we foresee ultimately to have a global system, or is that maybe just too much wishful thinking?
Well, I mean, I'll give an opinion, and then my colleagues can correct me, and I'm very pleased for them to do so. I think there are cultural levels of trust operating here, and these are legacy issues due to particular histories which go on, and these are fundamentally important. However, at a technology level, if you have a trusted research environment, if it's secure in one context, actually it's secure in many contexts.
Yeah.
And so the issue there is if you like, a federated approach to analysis across trusted research environments. And that can happen wherever you are, at whatever jurisdiction. Now, the issue is really, what is the scope of the trusted research environment? And one of the beauties of the NHS is, by definition, it is a total population sample, therefore representative. Where you have different systems, so for example, insurance-based systems, you just have to be a bit more careful about, who you are actually measuring, because, not everybody can buy into an insurance system.
Yeah. Jerome, if you could take the example of Belgium.
Yeah, I think I fully agree. In fact, I think it translates. The other part that I guess, John, you don't mention is in the case of the US, it's also a business. In other words, the players in this field are in fact in commercial competition to each other, and quite a fierce one, I would say. So on the flip side, I'm a big advocate of the system we have in Europe, and actually to really lay this path on this particular topic, I think we have a unique position because of the total sample size that you mentioned in the UK. We have the same thing in Belgium, where I think in Belgium, at least, we have not been able to get it quite as comprehensive as the NHS has done in the UK, is to really align then the different stakeholders within that. I think there, because okay, Belgium is a bit of a complicated country in that way, but I think there's that's certainly coming now. I mean, the national organizations are and the COVID has driven that, because everybody sees the need for it. So I think this is going to, convalesce to a more unified approach. And so I think, yeah, I think in Europe, we're also culturally speaking, well, at least very sensitive to the trust we have and the relationship we have with our patients in this way. And whereas in the US, it tends to be a little bit more to the commercial side of things. So I think there, on that aspect as well, I feel confident again that European players can really set the example on how to do this.
So my view, Jan, will be that the international linking up of data will be driven by academic institutions or larger biopharma companies that are working with individual states. So I think it will happen, but it will be on very specific areas and use cases, not sort of for the purpose of integrating. But again, it could be in certain fields of cancer or cardiovascular where people are going to link data across nations. But I don't think the government will push that. I think it will be more the academic institutions and the biopharma industry.
Yeah. No, go ahead, Jeroen.
No, perhaps just to add to that, I think the approach will likely be like Bruno is saying, the government basically allows or enables a certain, the research environment, a certain threshold, and then people can join in or not. I think that's probably more the way it's going to work, depending on the local situations. I think that's, in the EU, for example, there's going to be a big push to enable this federated environment, research environment, to really fund the infrastructure for that. I think that's an important part, and that's going to be an important driver to make this happen. And that will set a certain standard, and then countries or systems can join in or not, depending if they need a certain or reach a certain quality assurance. I think that's where it's going to go.
Yeah, I mean, that's maybe a sensitive topic if we talk about quality assurance and expanding the scope geographically into where you connect different systems. You probably end up also comparing different systems. And maybe there is a way to optimize patient treatments. That also means that potentially you're going to display or maybe share what are the best practices in different hospitals or different treatment centers. Isn't that going to be a risk for the care providers, that they will maybe be faced with some kind of a, yeah, this is good with you, this is bad with you. This, I mean, I'm putting it now very bluntly and very black and white. Is that going to, let's say that Oxford University Hospital is fantastic for cancer treatments. The one in country X is going to be bad. Is that a risk, or is that maybe an opportunity?
I think it's a benefit to patients, and we already have sort of evidence-based outcome metrics that are published, on the for patients to have access to. So I think that would be a great outcome for patients if we would start sharing the outcomes that are achieved in these different providers.
Yeah, and maybe not, I think I agree with Bruno. I think it's not only an opportunity for patients, but it's also a way to then also identify what exactly makes the difference between indeed Oxford and, I don't know, some other place. How, in other words, it's a continuing education type of, the aim should be to transplant, let's say, or to apply the methodology that's developed there and that works well and results in patient benefit elsewhere. And not we suddenly all need to go to Oxford. That's why, again, I think Europe, we're all non-profit partners here. I think this is where the beauty of the European system plays. We can there's always some barriers. I won't deny that either, but I think in general that's the mindset. Whereas in the US, it's a competitive commercial play. That might be different.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go to another topic. So I think the last part of the discussion should be about business models and commercial value. And let's just start with this statement or these keywords. What is the commercial value of the data, and will it change with this kind of new health record systems? Is it going to have a profound effect on the value? And will it change the balance also between the payers and the caregivers?
I'm happy to come in because it's a real hot topic in the UK on the commercial value of data. And it actually starts with the interplay between research and the clinic, because a lot of the sort of new technologies in digital health are based on machine learning using larger data sets. And the data sets in itself don't have a lot of value per se, but the tools coming out of that have commercial value. Usually that value is created through IP. So what we are currently doing is revising the data sharing agreement we have with the university, between the hospital and the university, and also revising the IP sharing, because that is going to be key to, first of all, determine the value and then be able to share the value. Of course, then there's the third-party transactions where biopharma or other players could want to have access to the trusted research environment and the data within it, and how that value is captured. But there's a lot of models out there that try to determine value of data and how you can then share the value between those that are the owners, the controllers of the data, and the ones that are using the data.
I completely agree with Bruno here. My personal view would be to make data as cheap as chips, because effectively the public benefit comes from the application of that data. So to make the application very straightforward means you will create more opportunity for public benefit. The IP challenge is actually difficult, because the more you divide up the IP, the less incentive there is for any one partner to engage. So I think that really is the discussion, and I'm not aware that it's bottomed out yet. I think from the public point of view, they would love to see commercial entities putting some of their profit back into the system, rather than just going to shareholders. That's not criticizing the legitimacy of shareholding at all, not in the slightest. But you're talking here about people being willing to share their data, wanting the enterprise to succeed, wanting us all to be one part of one big effort. And I think for there to be an explicit sharing of benefits is just very helpful in that.
We have one example, John, which you may be familiar. We have a agreement with a third-party, actually AIM-listed company, where the hospital has equity in the company. So we'll get some value uplift from that if the company is successful. But also we have a royalty share on any sales from products being developed by using the data.
Yeah. And I can couple to that. I think I was just going to mention the same thing. I think it's only fair that indeed the public investment in that, in the prelude to making such an opportunity possible, should have a proportional sharing, and that's been our policy since the beginning. We are indeed a shareholder in over 30 VC-backed companies, all based on this rationale. And so I think that's an important story to tell. I think it's also a way to make sure that other aspects then are being taken into account when therapies are being developed or biomarkers are being developed en cours de route by these private companies. So I think it's this tech transfer approach is exactly what I would say is indeed needed, and make it visible so that patients realize indeed this is not a free lunch for industry. No, it's actually something where some flowbacks will occur, and that will improve again the non-profit part of it. So I think there's definitely ways established to capture both things. But the results, I think I do agree with the IP challenge. Some of the classical IP that is sometimes hard to define, because it's also about know-how, about methodologies, about algorithms, about AI, and so that is a bit of a challenge, a new way. But if you think about it as contributors, you really need not only the data, but you need also somebody to really research it and generate the insight, which then can be translated into a business opportunity or not. I think that's so there's many components that feed into this. But I agree. The other thing which I would add challenging in this field is it's often based on consortia of different legal entities that have to come together to make this happen. There's a university hospital, there's a research institute, there's perhaps several universities collaborating together. And then in order to, at least the lessons from the past would be to make upfront amongst these parties an agreement, if we see an opportunity for commercialization, we should probably indicate one party of those to take the lead in that, because industry will never negotiate with 15 different parties at the same time. This is just simply impossible. So there's, again, ways to organize this tech transfer upfront by thinking about it and agreeing amongst consortia that want to address the specific question.
So I'm thinking as a non-expert about the data mining and things. Is there a way there's a return on investment for the patient? I mean, because it could be that you get like the next Google or the next Facebook on patient data, maybe in the future at some point, if we're not careful, or maybe we're careful. Is there going to be, is there a potential for money to flow back to patients? Or is that something that's really complete stupid question?
Well, I think it flows back to patient benefit and continuous improvement. Direct, if you mean as a kind of in a sort of simplistic shareholdership, I think that's a
royalty.
That's a difficult one to see how that would work, of course. Yeah. I mean, that said, I think patient organizations have organized themselves, have in fact already engaged very much more actively in research than before, even non-data associated research. They become, and they do the same thing. They become shareholders, or they request a return. I mean, there's very notorious examples of that, as you know, and for example, the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. So I think, and that's a good thing, because that has resulted in a drug which has made it. So okay, then there's connotations to be made around that, and it's often around pricing, etc. But okay, on a helicopter view, I think it's good that there is a proportional return, as was said before, in return for the access to data in this case, or the involvement in research in a broader sense.
I think there's no harm in just taking a step back and saying, yes, okay, Bruno talked about individual patient keys, that they are a way of returning remuneration to participants, etc. But the remuneration would be minuscule.
Yeah.
It's at a population level, it'll buy you a bottle of lemonade once a year or something. But the impact on the incentive for a commercial entity to develop the drug would be substantial, because to them, a substantial amount of value is lost. And I think there's just, I'm not saying I have an answer, I don't have an answer, but I think the equation is very simple. At what point does the very, very limited, dissipated individual benefit, which is quite legitimate at one level, but at what point does it obstruct the main goal, which is of collective patient benefit through the delivery of a new treatment? Now, health economists don't have the data to answer that, but I think it's a really interesting question.
Okay, yeah. Let's see, with the view of the time, I want to have some maybe questions from the audience. But I would like to make a final round, and maybe because I'm asking some questions, but maybe we have to listen to you also and say, like, what is the single biggest challenge or opportunity that you feel you want to give as a message here in this webinar? Is there something you want to share to say, like, I mean, we discussed a lot of topics today, but is there one thing that each one of you wants to say, like, okay, I really want to stress this as a key message for this webinar? And maybe I start with you, John.
I would say coordination of data resources, research-ready data, controlled, precise, this really has to be approached strategically rather than as a function of market forces.
Okay. Bruno?
Well, if you talk about challenge, for me, it's stakeholder management. We talked about creating trust, but also balancing commercial interests with public health interests. And there's lots of pitfalls that you can encounter if you're not careful managing all of the stakeholders in this area.
Yeah, I agree. I was going to voice the same thing. I think I think that's why, because we should also be honest. I think it is a change, and any change brings about fear for change. It brings about, the stakeholder management, and so I think we need to be mindful of that, but especially keep stressing the trailblazing example of indeed the COVID trials, which has really pushed that. But second, also the opportunity that this provides, and I think it's by de facto something where clinicians have to come together with basic scientists, come together with regulation or health authorities to really rethink some of the health economics, etc. So it's really a lot of stakeholders that need to come together to make it happen. And everybody sees the opportunity. It's been talked about enough, but put it in practice in a pragmatic and especially efficient way, because the fear of losing trust is so big that sometimes it really stifles research progress, which I think nobody wants. So I think that's where we need to think also a bit company-like, if I may say, what's also an efficient process to make things happen. And that will require a lot of the stakeholder management, let's put it this way.
Okay, thank you. On that note, I would like to see if there's any questions in the chat. Not at this time, I think.
There's none in the chat box, but I'd just like to give any participants the opportunity just to unmute if that's easier, or there's the raise your hand function. So now is your time. It's perfect opportunity while you have experts on the line if you have any burning questions. Just in the meantime, just to express my thanks to the panel for your insights. That sounded like a positive discussion, but also there is some challenges that lay ahead. And it's quite a complicated area, as you see, many stakeholders, and keeping that dialogue with patients, of course, is always very important. And then, of course, there's the multitude of therapeutic areas as well to consider, and where the challenges differentiate between them. I'd just also like to highlight that Flanders Investment in Trade will be exhibiting on Thursday at the in-person event in London. So please do drop by, say hello there. And the next innovation workshop will be kicking off at 11:30, hosted by DLRC, and that's on the role of AI in the medical device industry. So lots more to come up after that as well. But if there's no burning questions, then I think it just leaves
Just make sure you stay safe at the live event in London, because also Omicron is on the rise in the UK.
Indeed, follow all the guidance in the joining instructions. Absolutely, yeah. And if you're just traveling generally, absolutely, yeah. I do wish everyone stays well, and yes, indeed, thank you very much for your time on the panel today.
Thank you very much.
Discussion.